At just 22, a slim and stunning Hollywood actress endured a horrific ordeal. For 36 to 48 hours, she was tortured in ways that are unspeakable. In the end, she was brutally, mercilessly murdered. Her body was gruesomely bisected at the waist, her uterus and most of her organs were taken by the perpetrator, and her mouth was lacerated from both corners to the earlobes, leaving a ghastly clown-like appearance known as a Glasgow smile. Her mutilated body was left, ravaged and discarded inhumanly, on a lawn beside a street. The killer's action was so twisted that it's beyond any words. For decades, people have been trying to uncover the truth. What drove the killer to such monstrousness? And what really happened back then? Today, I'm bringing you a chilling, unsolved mystery which is known around the world, the Black Dahlia case. This tale takes us through the tragic life of Elizabeth Short, who met a brutal end. The killer's methods were so shocking that even the police investigators were left horrified by the scene. Not only was she tortured for an extended period before her death, but her corpse was also extremely mutilated after she was killed. It's not just a story of a murder. It's a story of a city, a time, and a crime that has left an indelible mark on American history. Due to the extremely bad impact of the case at the time, it led to a media frenzy and countless private investigators jumped into the hunt for answers. Yet, even as we step into the 21st century, the case remains unsolved, cementing its place in American history as one of the most famous cold cases. So, without further ado, let's dive into the world-renowned unsolved case, the Black Dahlia. The location of the story is in Los Angeles, California, which is the second largest city in the United States. Known as the City of Angels, and it was also awarded the title of one of the top 10 spring cities in the world in 2017. And, of course, it's home to the world-famous movie capital, Hollywood. Ironically, it's in this city of dreams that our story takes a dark turn. Elizabeth Short, a victim of a heinous crime, was murdered in a place known for its beauty and glamour. Yet, despite the notoriety of the case, the killer has remained elusive. Why is that? Why hasn't the person responsible been brought to justice? Let's travel back in time to January 15, 1947, and walk through the details of this case together. We'll explore every twist and turn that has kept the Black Dahlia case alive in the public's imagination for decades. Around 10 a.m. on January 15, 1947, in the Leimert Park district of Los Angeles, a housewife named Betty Berzinger was on her way with her 3-year-old daughter to pick up a pair of shoes that was repaired from the cobbler. When they passed by a lush lawn in Norton District on 39th Street, Berzinger thought she spotted a damaged plaster mannequin lying in the grass. Wanting a clearer look, she stepped closer with her daughter in tow. But as she approached, her heart dropped. What she initially mistook for a mannequin was, in fact, something far more sinister: a dismembered, naked female body. The shock sent her reeling. She quickly shielded her daughter's eyes, and without delay, Berzinger grabbed her daughter and ran to a nearby house, where she used the telephone to call the police.
As I was walking along, I happened to glance over at my side, and I saw this strange sight. It looked like a mannequin that had been cut in half and was separated and was lying there. And I didn't glance at it too long because I had my little girl with me, and I thought, gosh, as I walked on further, I thought, that just didn't seem right to me.
And with that, the world-shocking Black Dahlia murder case has thus begun. On the morning of January 15, 1947, a chilling discovery was made in Los Angeles. The body, showing signs of having been refrigerated, suggested that the time of death was roughly between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. on the 13th. The cause of death was a severe blow to the head, causing a skull fracture and excessive facial bleeding from the lacerations combined with shock due to a concussion of the brain. There was even a possibility that the blood loss from the face could have been aspirated into the lungs, leading to asphyxiation. Dew on the body indicated that the body might have been dumped around 2 a.m. Despite the location being frequented by vehicles and pedestrians, no witnesses came forward, making it clear that this was not the first crime scene. Reports from the crime scene at the time described a brutal scene of abuse. The victim had been savagely beaten and tortured before being dismembered into 2 sections, with the body cut in 2 halves at the navel posthumously. However, the extent of the mutilation and the numerous fatal wounds left also opens the terrifying possibility that the victim could have been bisected alive. The body was found with the face to the sky, arms raised and bent at the elbows, and legs straightly spread apart approximately at a 60-degree angle. The upper and lower body were placed about 50 centimeters apart, and there was no free-flowing blood at the scene, as the body had been thoroughly cleaned and all the blood drained. The victim's organs had been almost entirely removed, especially with the lower body organs missing, and a wound on the lower abdomen resembling a hysterectomy. The uterus had been taken, and any signs of sexual assault were washed away. The chest was severely damaged, with the right breast almost completely cut off, and there were multiple cigarette burn marks. The organs from the upper body were stuffed into the chest cavity. An autopsy revealed that there was no undigested food in the stomach, but the remnants in the stomach suggested that the victim had been forced to swallow feces. Both arms showed bruises, fractures, and signs of fingers being broken, several fingernails ripped off, and most of the red nail polish worn off. The wrists bore marks of being bound, and the ankles showed signs of being tied, with large wounds that appeared to have been inflicted while the victim was either spread-eagled or hung upside down. The legs had fractures at the knee and multiple shallow cuts, mostly scratches, with a significant wound on the front of the left thigh. There was no evidence of any assault on the genitals, and the intestines and other organs were found stuffed back into the abdominal cavity after being washed. The skull showed an embedded fracture, and the face had multiple open wounds, the most striking of which was the mouth, brutally cut from the corners of her mouth toward her earlobes, presenting a horrifying Glasgow smile. The wound was jagged, and the oral cavity was severely decayed, filled with wax that might have been used to stop the bleeding. The jawbone and masseter muscles were also severed. The victim's body showed signs of brutal torture, indicating that the dismemberment was likely done with a large machete-like weapon. The cause of death was uncertain, but it was clear that she had been inhumanely tortured possibly for about 36 to 48 hours before her death. The torture instruments might be knives and cudgels. Additionally, the police inferred from the wounds that the victim had been enslaved to prolonged abuse for at least 20 to 40 hours before death, with weapons including knives, clubs, blunt objects, axes, and saws, etc. In speaking of these, I can't help to say, God punish the madness perpetrator. When the victim was found, her black hair looks like a black dahlia in full bloom radiating outwards, hence the name, the Black Dahlia. According to newspaper reports shortly after the murder, Elizabeth Short received the nickname, the Black Dahlia, at a Long Beach, California drugstore in mid-1946 as a word play on the then-current movie The Blue Dahlia. However, Los Angeles County District Attorney investigators' reports state that the nickname was invented by newspaper reporters covering the murder. Los Angeles Herald-Express reporter Bevo Means, who interviewed Short's acquaintances at the drugstore, is credited with first using the Black Dahlia name. Given the severe damage to the body, the police could only identify the victim by fingerprinting her remains and sending the prints along with photographs of the body to the FBI headquarters. Betty's fingerprints had been entered into the system twice before, once when she applied to work in the commissary of a U.S. Army base, and once when she was arrested in Santa Barbara, California on September 23, 1943 for underage drinking. So the identity of the deceased was easily confirmed. Elizabeth Short, nicknamed Beth and Betty, a 22-year-old white woman. She stood 168 centimeters tall, weighed 52 kilograms, had blue eyes, and originally had brown hair, which she dyed black. Born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. Grew up in Medford. Elizabeth was the third of 5 daughters to Cleo Short and Phoebe May Sawyer. Her father built miniature golf courses until the 1929 stock market crash, in which he lost much of the family's assets. Cleo Short had 5 kids to feed, and he had no idea how he was going to do it. In 1930, he parked his car on the Charlestown Bridge and vanished. He'd purposely jumped off the bridge to end his life. Sadly, this was a common occurrence in the years following the stock market crash, which he actually staged his own suicide and abandoned the family to California when Betty was only 6 years old. After that, her mother moved the family to a small apartment in Medford, found a work as a bookkeeper, and raised 5 young girls all on her own. That actually leaves Elizabeth to grow up in a single-parent household. Despite an attempt at reconciliation years later, when her father called her mother hoping to rekindle their relationship, her mother refused. In 1940, troubled by asthma and bronchitis, Short was sent to live in Miami, Florida during the winter at the age of 16. That would at least take care of Short's health problems. Living in both Boston and Florida, however, gave Short a very disjointed life. She suffered at school. Eventually, she dropped out in her sophomore year and embarked on a life of work, primarily as a waitress in a hotel, which is a very common experience for many young people in America back then. Even from a young age, Beth was strikingly beautiful, and by the age of 16, she had blossomed into a stunning, attractive young girl. She began to emulate her idol, Deanna Durbin, dressing entirely in black: underwear, outerwear, dresses, stockings, shoes, even dyed her hair black and wore black rings. These outfit choices might be another reason why she became known as the Black Dahlia. In 1942, an envelope arrived at the Short household. It would change their lives forever. From the postmark, Mom could see that the letter was from California, and her curiosity was piqued. Who did she know in California? When she opened the letter and started reading it, I'm sure her heart skipped a beat. After all, the letter had come from beyond the grave. Short's mom stared at the letter and tried to make sense of it. Surely, there was some kind of mistake. It was from her husband, the one who had jumped off the bridge after the stock market crash. It turned out that he hadn't jumped at all, but had faked his own disappearance in order to start a new debt-free life. He'd moved to California, and he felt very, very guilty about leaving his family alone. Mom had been raising 5 daughters on her own and was dealing with Elizabeth's health concerns. Suddenly, Mrs. Short saw the solution right there in front of her. Elizabeth Short was soon on her way to sunny Vallejo, California, to live with her father and take care of her bronchitis. She hadn't seen Dad since she was 6 years old, but she hoped they would get along. Well, she was in for an unpleasant surprise. Before long, Short was arguing with her father, who worked at a nearby shipyard. The arrangement wouldn't work after all, but Short was not about to leave California behind so easily. She'd tasted the West Coast lifestyle, and she wanted more. Sadly, it was this love for California that would lead to her dark end. After a year of battling it out with her father, Short decided to jump ship. She was just 19 when she walked out the door, found a place to live, and got herself a job. Not bad for a high school dropout. Her job, working for a U.S. Army sergeant at an Air Force base, ended up being horrible, all for one twisted reason. Her boss abused her. This deplorable situation led Short to quickly leave town, and she ended up in Santa Barbara. Unfortunately, there was just more trouble in store for her there. What young person wouldn't want, after a hard day's work, to have a few cool drinks with friends? Well, because Short was just 19 at this time, having a drink meant that she broke the law. In 1943, officers detained her for underage drinking. The authorities in Santa Barbara saw a young woman who was not under any adult supervision, so they did something heartless. They sent her back to live with her mom. Short had gotten used to a certain amount of independence, so she came up with a plan. Short didn't return to her mother's home. Instead, she headed to Florida. Remember, World War II was heating up, and there were Army personnel all over the U.S. at this time. For a young romantic woman, this was a bit like being a kid in a candy store. Handsome men walked the streets in uniform and lived in fear of Uncle Sam sending them overseas. During her teenage years, Beth set 2 ideals for herself. First, to marry a military man, preferably an airman. And second, to become a movie star. To achieve these 2 dreams, she began frequently places public near the naval bases and engaging in flirtatious relationships with several servicemen. Short once fell for an officer, but they said goodbye fast. However, Her father's disapproval of her lifestyle, combined with his abandonment of the family when she was very young, led to a complete breakdown in their relationship. By the end of 1945, when Beth was 21, she had finally entered into a romantic relationship with a decorated Army Air Force officer named Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., who was assigned to the 2nd Air Commando Group and in training for deployment to China-Burma-India Theater of Operations. But their time together was also short-lived. Soon after, Gordon was deployed overseas. Short told friends that Gordon wrote her a letter from India proposing marriage while he was recovering from injuries sustained from an airplane crash. Short could not get her response down on paper fast enough. She certainly did want to marry Gordon, and she said so much in her letter. Now, all they had to do was wait for Gordon to return to the States, and her life would be perfect. When it came to living during the time of World War II, anticipating anything was dangerous. You never knew what could happen next. Short managed to keep her spirits up while waiting for Gordon to return. In August of 1945, a few days before the end of World War II, she experienced a tragedy of cruel coincidence. Gordon was in another plane crash. This time the young officer was not so lucky. He passed on August 10th, 1945. Short, of course, was a wreck. Her perfect life was not going to happen after all. Even Gordon's friends in the Air Commandos confirmed that Gordon and Short were engaged. His family denied any connection after Short's murder. With Gordon's death, Beth's dreams of love were shattered. Beth's second dream was to become a movie star. A year after losing Gordon, Short left Florida and went to California. Short ended up staying in California and not returning to Florida. She got a job as a waitress and a room in a boarding house located behind a nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard, hoping her beauty would catch the eye of a talent scout. But the path to stardom was not as smooth as she had imagined. Her extravagant spending and lack of discipline led to financial struggles, sometimes even leaving her without food or a place to sleep. At times, she resorted to selling her body just for a meal or a bed for the night. In spite of her hardships, Beth never skimped on her attire, even when it meant going hungry or cold. But we don't know if it was the whole picture. Some newspapers drive the narrative of the story in order to make the most money from headlines. They even depicted Elizabeth Short as a woman who prowled Hollywood Boulevard, wearing revealing clothes. Although a popular portrayal amongst her acquaintances and many true crime authors was of Short as a call girl, the Los Angeles District Attorney's grand jury proved there was no existing evidence that she was ever a prostitute, and the District Attorney's office attributes the claim to confusion with a prostitute of the same name. This difficult period lasted for 2 years until January 8, 1947, when Beth decided to go to Chicago. Reportedly, a friend of her received a letter from her saying she was preparing to become a fashion model. This was the last letter she wrote before her death. On January 9th, a salesman named Robert Manley drove her to the coach station, which was the last time she was seen alive. She was supposedly going to visit her older sister, but no one knows if she ever boarded that coach. A week later, she was found dead. With few close friends, her disappearance went largely unnoticed, and no one reported her missing to the police. Beth, who craved fame and attention, ended her life in obscurity. Her funeral was a somber affair, attended by only 6 relatives. She was laid to rest at Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland. After Short's sisters had grown up and married, Short's mother moved to Oakland to be near her daughter's grave. Her mom finally returned to the East Coast in the 1970s and lived into her 90s. On January 23rd, just a week after Beth's murder, someone sent a package of her personal belongings to a newspaper office. The items included her birth certificate, social security card, photos with friends, some business cards, and newspaper clippings about the death of her lover Matt Gordon. Among the items, a valuable address book was found, but several pages had been torn out. Despite this, it still contained the names and contact informations of 75 men. A letter attached the package that was composed of cut-out words from newspapers and magazines said, "Los Angeles Examiner and other papers. Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." The killer had taken precautions, leaving no fingerprints or any other clues that could be traced back to the killer. On January 25th, just a couple of days after the initial shock of the Black Dahlia case, investigators made another grim discovery. Beth's black patent leather purse and her one matching shoe were found in a trash bin at Unit 1819E, located in the 25th Street district, only a short distance from where her body had been discovered. Even though the proximity to the crime scene, the items yielded no evidence linking them to the killer. On January 28th, the investigation into the Black Dahlia case was further complicated by a cryptic letter sent to the police station. Handwritten and ominous, the note read, "Here it is. Turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police." The letter was signed by the Black Dahlia Avenger, leading many to believe that the killer might be planning to turn himself in at the specified mentioned time. However, when the anticipated hour came, the murderer didn't reveal. Instead, another letter arrived. This one is a mix of cut-out words and handwritten text stating, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." After the Black Dahlia case hit the headlines, there was an uproar in American society. People were outraged by the cruelty and perversion of the killer and urgently demanded that the police solve the case as soon as possible. The police department received a total of 16 letters, but only the 3 mentioned above were believed to be from the killer. The first letter was definitely from the perpetrator, while the second and third were also suspected to be from the criminal, although this was not confirmed. Unfortunately, none of these letters or the packages they came with yielded any fingerprints or other valuable clues from the perpetrator. This lack of evidence only deepened the mystery and frustration surrounding the case, leaving the police and the public with more questions than answers. Once the Black Dahlia case was widely publicized, it sparked a frenzy. In a very short time, as many as 33 individuals came forward to the police, claiming to be the murderer. However, after thorough investigations using various methods, the police were able to rule out their involvement, and most of these individuals were subsequently admitted to psychiatric hospitals. The police also meticulously investigated the 75 men found in Beth's address book. After careful scrutiny, their suspicions were also cleared. Even Robert, the last person known to have seen Beth, underwent multiple interrogations and polygraph tests, and he was ultimately ruled out as a suspect as well. Considering the precision of the cuts on the victim's body, the police deduced that the killer must have used an extremely sharp instrument, likely a surgical blade. Such a tool is not easy to come by, leading them to suspect that the crime might have been committed by a doctor or a medical student. Consequently, local hospitals and medical schools were investigated, but no suspect was found. The police then attempted to create a psychological profile to narrow down their search. After analysis, the police believed that the brutal disfigurement of the body indicated a deeply disturbed mind, possibly deriving some form of twisted pleasure from the mutilation. The fact that the killer sent 3 letters to the police was seen as a clear act of provocation, suggesting an individual with immense confidence, secure in the belief that he was uncatchable. The absence of fingerprints or any other evidence on the victim's body pointed to a meticulous and intelligent person. The police concluded that they were looking for someone with a high IQ. Finding such a person without any witnesses or physical evidence in a sea of people was an enormous challenge. Despite meticulous investigations across the city of Los Angeles, the police spent 3 years and examined hundreds of people connected to the victim. Despite their best efforts, the lack of evidence meant that the case gradually went cold. This case became one of the most shocking unsolved mysteries in the history of California post-World War II. In 2013, more than 60 years after the crime, coincidentally, a startling revelation came from a retired LAPD detective, 71-year-old Steve Hodel. In his newly published book, Black Dahlia Avenger 2, he made a shocking claim. His own father, the late Surgeon George Hodel, was likely the perpetrator of the Black Dahlia murder. Steve found that his father had kept photographs of Elizabeth Short while he was going through his father's belongings after his father's death, indicating a connection between them. George Hodel was a man of influence and wealth, known for his playboy lifestyle. He had hosted numerous parties in Los Angeles, often attended by Hollywood starlets, and Elizabeth Short was known to have been a guest at some of these gatherings. George also had a dark side, with a history of abusing his girlfriends, and there were even rumors that he had killed his secretary. The police had their suspicions about him, but when they tried to investigate further, he was shielded from scrutiny by some people. By the time the police were ready to re-examine George in 1950 in connection with the Black Dahlia case, it was too late. He had already fled to the Philippines and had no intention of returning. He lived out his remaining years there, passing away from old age in 1999. The suspicion around George was further fueled by the precise cuts on Elizabeth Short's body and the professional manner in which her internal organs were handled. As a surgeon, George had access to professional surgical tools and good surgical experience that could account for the precision of the mutilations. However, despite the compelling circumstantial evidence, there was no direct proof linking him to the crime back then. Steve Hodel submitted his investigative findings to the police, who responded that the evidence was compelling enough that if George were still alive, he would have been arrested for murder. But with George deceased, the case remained unresolved, leaving the true nature of his involvement a mystery. Perhaps only God, the victim, and the killer know the truth. It's also worth noting that after the Black Dahlia case, the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles became notorious for a string of murders and paranormal events. Some sources claim that Elizabeth Short was last seen around the Cecil Hotel, casting a shadow of dread over the establishment. Over the decades, the hotel has been the site of numerous violent deaths. On October 12, 1962, Pauline Otten fell to the death from the hotel, tragically causing another pedestrian's death. On June 4, 1964, Pigeon Goldie Osgood was brutally raped and murdered at the hotel. The killer has not been found as of 2014. During the 1980s, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, stayed at the hotel for several months, during which he murdered 14 people. Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger, known as the Vienna Strangler, also killed several prostitutes while staying there. In 2010, a Los Angeles firefighter reported being stabbed while responding to a distress call at the hotel, but police found no evidence that any attackers had come. The last high-profile case was on February 19, 2013, when the body of Canadian-Chinese student Elisa Lam was found in a water tank on the hotel's rooftop. The bizarre circumstances of the case thrust the hotel back into the public eye, adding another layer of mystery to the hotel's dark history. And we may also elaborate some of these cases above in future videos. You must know what I am saying. In 2011, the hotel's name was changed to Stay on Main in an effort to distance the establishment from its past. On December 13, 2021, the Cecil Hotel reopened as an affordable housing complex operated by the Skid Row Housing Trust. The facility will provide affordable living accommodations for 600 low-income residents. In 1987, James Ellroy's neo-noir novel, The Black Dahlia, was published. It was made into a movie directed by Brian De Palma in 2006. Elizabeth Short was played by actress Mia Kirshner in the film. But Short would never know that she'd gotten what she'd been looking for in this way. In heaven, in another world beyond our own, we don't know if the beautiful, romantic Black Dahlia has found her Prince Charming, Gordon, but we can hope. May there be no crime in this world. Well, thanks for watching. That's all the content of this video today. If you got more details that I didn't mention or any mistakes in this video, please leave your comments below. It's not easy for newcomers to create. I mean, if you like this video, please hit that subscribe button. It's one small gesture for you, but a great motivation for me to move forward. I'll see you next time. Peace.